childhood, first murders, and the beginning of evil. He was quiet. People called him a calm, harmless teacher, but no one knew what kind of darkness lived inside him. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, later the world would call him the Butcher of Rostov. But this story didn't start with murder. It began with hunger, fear, and a childhood scarred by horror. Born in 1936 in a small Ukrainian village during Stalin's famine, Andrei grew up among starvation and death. Millions were dying across the land. His mother told him stories that froze his blood.
They took your brother Stepan. They ate him.
Whether that was true or not, the words never left his mind. The Holodomor was real, and in that nightmare, humanity had vanished. His father, Roman Chikatilo, was captured by the Germans in Wodifu and returned branded as a traitor. Andrei grew up in shame and silence, in a home filled with fear and poverty. At school he was shy, isolated, and mocked by classmates. He studied well but had no friends. When he reached adolescence, another wound appeared. He discovered he was impotent. That humiliation burned into his soul.
I could not love women. They frightened me.
After military service in Belarus, he married a co-worker, Feodosia Odenschenko, and had 2 children. Outwardly, he was a model citizen, a teacher, a father, a Soviet man. Inside, something dark was growing. In 1978, the darkness finally exploded. 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova was walking home from school in the town of Shakhty. Chikatilo offered her a piece of candy and lured her into the woods. There, he strangled her to death. It was his first murder, but the system failed. Police arrested an innocent man, Alexander Kravchenko, who was later executed for the crime. The real killer walked free. Andrei felt something he had never felt before, a twisted sense of power. He had killed and escaped, and that meant he could do it again. Between 1981 and 1984, he began traveling for work, hunting in train stations and bus stops. He offered lost children and young women help, then led them into the forest. The pattern was always the same: lure, murder, mutilate, vanish. By 1984, at least 20 bodies had been found across Rostov region, but the Soviet Union had a policy. There are no serial killers in our country. So each murder was filed as a separate case, and the butcher kept killing. That year, the KGB finally took notice. Colonel Isa Kostoev was assigned to lead the investigation. Thousands of people were interrogated, but political pressure and lack of evidence made progress slow. Police even arrested Chikatilo once for minor offenses, but released him again. From 1985 to 1989, he killed over 30 more victims: children, students, and travelers. The region lived in fear. Parents kept their kids indoors. Rumors spread of a monster roaming the forests of Rostov. Then in 1990, his luck ran out. A young boy was found dead in Lesopark Forest near Rostov. This time, the police set a trap. At the Rostov train station, a patrol officer spotted a tall man with a black bag and cold eyes. Inside the bag were a knife, rope, and traces of blood.
I am a teacher.
The officer let him go, but filed a report. Days later, after another body was discovered, that report resurfaced. They knew who he was. On November 20th, 1990, police watched as Andrei Chikatilo approached 2 children near the station. They moved in and arrested him. The hunt was over. But the real horror was just beginning. The hunt was over. After 12 years of horror, the man who had terrified an entire region was finally in handcuffs. But no one yet understood the scale of what he had done. November 20th, 1990, Rostov-on-Don train station. Andrei Chikatilo was arrested by police who had watched him approach 2 young children. He was calm, polite, almost bored. When they searched his bag, they found a knife, rope, soap, and pieces of blood-stained cloth.
He simply said, I am a teacher.
But the cold in his eyes said everything. At first, he denied everything. He spoke softly, answered questions with confidence, and acted insulted by suspicion. But one man saw through him: investigator Isa Kostoyev. Kostoyev noticed that whenever murder was mentioned, Chikatilo's lips twitched, almost as if he were hiding a smile. After days of questioning and evidence mounting, the knife, the fibers, the identical wounds on dozens of victims, Chikatilo finally broke. On November 22nd, he began to talk.
Quietly, methodically. I killed them, he said. All of them. I couldn't stop myself.
He confessed to 52 murders. He remembered every single victim, where, how, and why. He guided police to burial sites no one had ever found. Every location he described matched real evidence. The details were so exact that even hardened detectives felt sick listening to him. Forensic teams confirmed his words: the knife wounds, the missing eyes, the cut clothing, the same rope fibers. His crimes had stretched from 1978 to 1990, 12 years of blood. When psychiatrists examined him, they found something terrifying. He was completely sane. He knew what he was doing. He simply didn't care.
He told them, I'm not insane, I'm just different. I was born like this. He spoke about his impotence, his humiliation as a child, and how killing gave him power. He said that each murder made him feel alive again. He described the act not as violence, but as control.
Psychologists called him a sadistic psychopath, someone who finds pleasure in domination and pain. In 1992, his trial began in Rostov. It was one of the most shocking trials in Soviet history. Hundreds of people crowded the courtroom: journalists, families of the victims, and ordinary citizens who wanted to see the monster with their own eyes. He sat inside a metal cage, a literal cage, to protect him from the enraged public. His face was pale, his eyes lifeless. At times he smiled. At times he mocked the court.
He said, I'm not a monster. I'm just like you. Only my urges are stronger.
The family screamed from the gallery.
The judge demanded silence.
Reporters wrote that it was like watching evil itself take human form. Over the course of the trial, the court confirmed 52 murders.
Chikatilo described them without emotion, even correcting investigators on small details.
His calmness was more horrifying than his crimes. On October 15, 1992, the court found him guilty on all counts. The sentence: death by shooting.
When the judge asked for his final words, Chikatilo said, I found no place in this world. Maybe death will give me peace.
But even then, there was no remorse. He had turned his own depravity into a performance. For the next 2 years, he waited on death row in a small cell in Rostov prison. He read newspapers and wrote letters, still convinced that psychiatrists should study him. He believed he was important, that his crimes made him unique. On February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, his final morning arrived. He refused breakfast. At 9 a.m., guards took him from his cell. He said nothing. A single gunshot ended his life. The butcher of Rostov was dead, but his shadow remained. In the aftermath, the Soviet government was forced to admit that serial killers could exist, even in a society that claimed to have none. His case changed Russian law enforcement forever. New departments were created to study criminal psychology. And yet, decades later, his name still sends chills through Russia. Andrei Chikatilo, the teacher who became a predator. The man who lived among ordinary people, smiled at them, taught their children, and then hunted them. He was not a demon. He was human. And that is what makes his story truly terrifying. Because evil doesn't always wear fangs. Sometimes it wears a smile.